this panel is going to be a little walk down memory lane to have a look at some of the biggest stories that have shaped our industry over the past decade. So I would love to welcome to the stage our moderator, Ben Schiller. And then on our panel, we've got Dan Kuhn, David Z. Morris, Anna Bajdakova, Nick D, and special guest, Jeff Wilzer. Come on up, guys.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is the Metaverse stage. I'm Ben Schiller. I'm the features and opinion editor here at CoinDesk. And joining me today is a very esteemed panel of contributors, all CoinDesk journalists. So we have David Z. Morris. He is our columnist, chief insights officer. And we have Nick Day. He's our regulation managing editor. Anna Bajdakova is a staff writer. And we have Dan Kuhn, he's a deputy managing editor, and we have Jeff Wilzer, who is a special guest lead feature writer at CoinDesk. So this year, a special year in CoinDesk history. It's 10 years of CoinDesk, and it's coming up in May. And anyone who's been in crypto as long as we have and seen 10 years of crypto history will know that 10 years is an awfully long time in crypto history. There's been a lot of ups and downs, scandals, disasters, as well as all the development. So we like to say as journalists that 10 years in crypto is like 100 years in normally covering an industry. So we've seen a lot of stuff. So as part of our celebration of CoinDesk this year, we're doing 10 feature stories looking back at 10 big stories in crypto history. So that starts with Mt. Gox, which we're going to talk about in a minute with Jeff, and going all the way to FTX, which was obviously last year's big story. So it's going to be a little look back, but also kind of reflecting upon the kind of meaning of those stories for the crypto industry and for the future going forward. So we're going to start with Mt. Gox, which is still the most iconic hack in crypto history. And Jeff has been looking into that story recently, doing a recap and kind of looking at what it means now. So Jeff, in reporting that story again and looking at some of the people who are involved, what is the meaning of Mt. Gox today, and what is that? What is the kind of impact of that for our current moment?
Yeah, I was kind of shocked to find out, the deeper I dug, how not only iconic the hack was, but how freaking relevant it is to this very moment right now. All of the Gox issues are essentially issues that are still haunting the space today, right? The idea was, before Gox, it was very difficult to actually even buy Bitcoin. Gox made it very easy to do. Of course, the trade-off is you were trusting a centralized exchange. When that kind of went kaput, people were freaking out. People thought the entire space was at existential risk. And a lot of these folks in the space were like, no. It's actually not a problem with Bitcoin. It's a problem with trusting centralized space. In fact, when you look at some of the quotes from things in 2014 that a lot of industry heavyweights were saying about Gox, and they're saying it's a one bad actor, it's not Bitcoin. You could almost, swap out Gox for FTX and swap in SPF, and it's a carbon copy of the quotes. And what's funny is we kind of learned a lesson from Gox and kind of didn't, because it's essentially that same problem we still have almost 10 years later. And the last thing that I found interesting is the Gox story is not just some dusty old, historical story. It's still alive and breathing. The creditors have been on this near 10-year odyssey to recoup the losses. And of course, we all know you can't really find lost Bitcoin, but Karpalith, the old Gox CEO, happened to recover a paper wallet that had, oh, by the way, 200,000 Bitcoin, which is kind of like the biggest treasure discovery in history. The way I describe it in the article for CoinDesk is, imagine the Goonies, remember the Goonies, that film, right? They found One-Eyed Willie's pirate ship. Imagine not one pirate ship, but an entire fleet of ships. That amount of treasure was discovered. And for 10 years, it's a legal battle trying to get that back. And that's actually resolving in the next few months, which I found interesting. long-winded answer, Ben, but yeah, I think Gox is a story that was important 10 years ago and still equally important today.
And actually, these creditors, the ones who are getting their Bitcoin back, they've actually done well out of the deal, right? I mean,
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, well, it depends who you ask. I think a lot of them will say, well, because the way the negotiation is now, they're getting roughly 20% of the Bitcoin they had locked up in Gox, because that's about how much they that's about the proportion that was found on that paper wallet. So I think most of them would say, hey man, I lost 80% of my Bitcoin, like not cool. But the interesting thing is, that Bitcoin was locked up. They could not get it. So they were kind of forced to hodl. It was this massive long-term experiment of forced hodling. And when it was locked up, Bitcoin was worth originally $1,000 for Bitcoin. Even in now crypto quote unquote winter, even in a bear market, Bitcoin, as we all know, is still a hell of a lot more valuable than $1,000. So even when you discount their 80% loss, the fact that it's kind of like 30x since then, most of them are doing far better. I spoke to some who were like, they acknowledge, yeah, I mean, like in theory, maybe they could have sold all their Bitcoin in 2021 at the peak of the bull run, maybe. The reality is a lot of them would probably have cashed out some of that in the last, folks, a lot of the Gox people bought in Bitcoin when it cost like 10 cents or $5. They were thrilled when it crossed 10 bucks, much less 100 or 1,000. So if you've already seen your money like 200x, you're probably not going to stay in hoping at like 200,000x or whatever. So I think a lot of them would have cashed out long before. So a lot of them have effectively made up better than they would have without the hack. So it's kind of one of the weirdest, bankruptcy things ever. Last thing I'll say is, Ben, you mentioned it rightly so as the biggest hack in crypto history. I was curious. I'm looking at, all right, where does this kind of compare to bank heists in history in general? And like, if you look at the top 10 bank heists in recorded history, the cumulative value of those bank heists pales to the actual Bitcoin in Gox. So Gox was not just the biggest hack in crypto history, it's arguably the biggest robbery in the history of mankind, full stop.
Wow.
I got to ask, Jeff, is that at today's prices or at then prices?
At today's prices.
Okay.
But I think, though, it's right. At the time, it was thought of as like, oh, wow, big hack. But when you now think, I don't think anyone's, because no one really cares about Gox anymore, no one's really done that math, well, aside from the creditors, perhaps. But when you think about what the actual dollar value is now of the loots that was taken, it is arguably the biggest hack or robbery in the history of the planet.
Wow. Okay, David Morris, you're doing a story on the ICO boom, which was 2017 or 2018, I think you're doing it for. Tell us about the ICO boom for those who don't remember it, and what is the significance of that today, do you think?
Yeah, so this panel is the height of self-indulgence. It's journalists talking about journalism. So I'll be even more self-indulgent and talk about my personal journalism. Ben and I met in the sort of aftermath or the waning days of the ICO boom. He hired me for a magazine called Breaker that wound up being, for anybody who happens to remember it, fairly transformative for the way
R.I.P. Breaker.
And yeah, so like we were following the ICO thing very intently at the time. And to paraphrase a great man, it's still captured by a phrase that I think still embodies a lot of what's great about crypto, which is that it was very illegal and very cool. You saw so much dumb stuff, obviously. The thing that still sticks in my memory from that time is DentaCoin, which was going to be the new decentralized payment system for dentists around the world. And if you understand how money works, that doesn't make any sense. But God bless the DentaCoin people. They, at the very least, were sincere, so good on you. And we learned through that process. And I think that's the main point that I think we can bring forward from the ICO boom is that when you have a true free-for-all, a lot of bad stuff happens. but you also like get to learn lessons in a way that is way more hands-on and full contact than when you're working in a regulated environment. You want to chime in?
Yeah, it just, I remember 2018 was when I joined CoinDesk, and I was like, wow, people, like, there are so many things people are issuing cryptocurrencies, like, coins for, and I was like, this looks exciting, and I couldn't understand at first why, like, many CoinDeskers were kind of skeptical about that back then, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, case in point, even you, who I assume brought a lot of expertise to the table when you first came to CoinDesk, you know, to understand like the full stack of dependencies and real applications and like what is this stuff really for, super complicated. And so you'll have people who entirely sincerely will issue something that other people will look at and say, well, this doesn't make any sense. But the last thing I'll say about the ICO boom for now is that I think we're going through a period right now where obviously regulators would love to see that completely wiped off the map. And I think it's safe to say that whatever happens in the United States, that genie is not going back in the bottle, and decentralized blockchain-based fundraising is going to continue happening at like large scale around the world every single day until the heat death of the universe. That's not going away. You're still going to have a lot of crap out there and a lot of garbage, and so it just makes it all that more emphatically important for people who are taking risks on this stuff to fully own that risk, to educate yourself about everything that could go wrong, not just everything that could go right, and you know, be careful out there, but also keep doing it, I guess. But
arguably, we still see some version of the ICO in today's markets, right? I mean, NFT drops or DAOs. I mean, these are not fundraising, but they're fundraising-like, right? I mean.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people who are trying to get those things to be as close as possible to an ICO, be careful. But yeah, I mean, I think that probably one of the things that's going to become a contentious practice over the next year is airdrops based on engagement, so like retroactive engagement airdrops. I mean, I like the concept in some ways, but in other ways it's sort of not kosher. But yeah, I mean, and you know, there's tons of assets out there, obviously, that have huge market caps that are utter garbage, as we discovered with FTX. So none of this is entirely gone by any means.
All right, Nick, let's turn to you. So you're doing 2019, which was the year very much of Facebook's Libra, which was, when it was launched, it was seen as this kind of meteor from the sky that was going to kind of revolutionize money, and governments were super scared of Facebook because of its awesome power on the internet, but it didn't quite happen that way. How do we look at Facebook and Libra now in the rear-view mirror? I mean, do we think that a social media company like Facebook could issue a coin like this again? What is the significance of this today, do you think?
Honestly, I think the significance is, you know, this was kind of a dramatic, you know, it never launched, obviously. Libra never became a thing, but it still had some of the, you know, most wide-ranging, like, you know, regulatory impacts and legacies that we've seen from projects, right? Libra really pushed a lot of the crypto stuff that was kind of happening. You know, a lot of people thought of crypto as kind of ICO boom, you know what you're talking about. But it wasn't like a mainstream thing in the same way it was after Libra was announced. Suddenly, people were thinking, oh, wow, there's a company out here trying to create a cryptocurrency, and it has the reach and the resources and the global user base to actually make this a reality. And as you said, that freaked everyone out. Regulators around the world were saying, well, you got to slow down. We got to take a look at this and figure out what's going on here. You saw Congress in the U.S. go crazy. You saw, you know, regulators in, you know, France and all sorts of countries say, you know, we need to take a look at this and look under the hood. And, you know, ultimately, no regulator was willing to say, yeah, we think this is an okay model. But despite never launching and despite never going anywhere, really, we still see legislation, you know, stablecoin bills in the U.S., Europe's markets and crypto assets legislation that was just passed or approved, you know, last week to some extent. A lot of that stems from the impact and the legacy of Libra, because there was just so much concern, so much potential in that project that regulators were looking at it as, well, we have to pay attention now. And that might have even been before the crypto industry as an entity was ready for it, but it really sped up a lot of these conversations with regulators and lawmakers that were still kind of in the early stages at the time.
Right. Okay, Anna, you're doing FTX, which is maybe the hardest story in the package because it's so new and history hasn't really been written yet about it. So what do you think the significance of FTX is in its sort of long history of crypto? I mean, do you think we should think about it as a kind of special, unique event, or is it something sort of part of the full 10-year picture of crypto? I mean, sort of part of a pattern of crypto?
Well, it's interesting that actually, even during this panel, you can feel like the history, if not it repeats itself, then it goes not in the road, but maybe in the spiral. FTX, of course, is very different from the Mt. Gox hack, but it's not very different in the sense that it's 2022, I mean, the year of FTX failure, and you would think, and there's been multiple conversations about the crypto space is maturing, now it's not like in 2017, it's different now, and then something like that happens, and you're like, is that really that mature?
Right.
And how many other crypto companies, if you really poke them the way our brilliant colleague Ian Allison poked FTX. Can you find the same kind of empty space? So FTX actually looked like the crypto exchange of the newest generation that is transparent, very public frontman who is talking to regulators, lobbying all the time, is appearing on every stage. They bought stadium naming rights. They were everywhere. They were like, oh, this is really legit. And on the background, it was not that shiny and serious as anybody expected.
I mean, surely the difference between Mt. Gox and FTX is, with the latter, is sort of the context there. I mean, he was a big player in Washington. He was kind of putting crypto on the map as a kind of political issue. And actually, I think these politicians now have kind of backlashed against crypto because they feel personally affronted by that this guy came along and tried to form a relationship with them, and then he kind of turned out to be this fraud, so they kind of took it personally, and that's why we're seeing this backlash now, don't you think?
Yeah, I would think probably that had a bigger effect on this backlash because FTX seems like the most legit, the most open, and the crypto exchange that a regulator would endorse, and then it turns out that it's actually not, and now everybody is mad at FTX. And the people can talk about that they're not like FTX until they're blue in the face, but the well has already been poisoned, and that's of course not very good for the industry.
Right. I mean, it's worth pointing out that CoinDesk broke the FTX story, and I know we're sort of being self-indulgent here, but I think it does point to the importance of journalism in an industry, particularly like crypto, that is so murky and untransparent. It really needs someone to kind of peer under the hood a little bit. If it's not CoinDesk, at least someone else. Dan,
sorry, Ben. Can I jump in with one more FTX Gox? I think I'm so glad you mentioned the two of them in tandem. Sorry, Ben. Can I?
Yeah, please go.
It's really interesting. One more kind of Gox takeaway that might relate to FTX also is that, I think the last few months we can all say a lot of doom and gloom in the air, right, in the crypto space. When you go back and look at the Gox history, the past year was nothing compared to the sky is falling kind of nihilism almost in the post-Gox wake, in the carnage, right? And so there are a lot of folks who are like, wow, Bitcoin is dead. I know it's kind of a cliche now that Bitcoin is dead thing, but they were really saying that. And at one point, Gox represented 70% of all Bitcoin transactions. And the price after Gox just cratered. And so, not to get too Pollyanna here, but the fact that in that extremely bleak meltdown, Bitcoin obviously did recover. The space became stronger. There were lessons learned from, while I joked that a lot of lessons were not learned, some lessons were. security did get better. Some regulations improved. Protocols got better. So one would hope, back to FTX, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type vibes, and hopefully there's something to that also. Sorry to cut in.
Interesting. Dan Kuhn, so you're doing the story from 2015. That was what's known as the block size war, which sounds like a kind of technical, kind of bit nerdy debate, but it actually goes to a kind of central argument about Bitcoin and what crypto is for. Do you want to just unpack that a bit?
Yeah, before we get into that, I think there's a lot of things to talk about, like how blockchains should be governed and developed. I just wanted to say one quick thing about Ethereum, and because it relates to what we were talking about. I think we feel putting the founding of Ethereum on the list is worthwhile because it's like one of the few success cases in crypto that you could point to demonstrably, I think. And I'm reminded of a few quotes that Vitalik Buterin, one of the co-creators of Ethereum, has given over like the past couple of years at the height of the past two bear markets. In 2017, when ETH crossed like the 100 billion market cap, he tweeted out, like, have we really earned this price? And then a similar thing happened in 2021 when he was profiled by Time, where he was like, the machine works, but I can't control what people use it for. And I think that's true, where like you could hate Ethereum for ICOs or Dentacoin or like NFTs that resemble securities or whatever, but you kind of have to respect the chain a bit. And then I guess going back to, I don't want to draw like too much of a comparison between Ethereum and Bitcoin, but just one of the legacies of the block size war, so like it wasn't called a civil war for nothing. It was a really contentious debate.
Do you want to just kind of quickly recap what it was, what the debate was about?
Okay, so when Bitcoin was created, it had no block size limit, which means that you could basically put however much data you wanted on chain. And then a few years down the line, Satoshi surreptitiously put a 1 megabyte limit on the chain. And then people realized, as Bitcoin was growing, that it wasn't scaling. And so there was kind of an internal debate between like how much to increase the block size. So you had big blockers and small blockers, and it was really contentious. You could kind of describe the big blockers as being close to Satoshi's original vision for electronic money. Like they wanted Bitcoin to be used for payments, like the base layer chain. And then the small blockers thought we could scale payments through side chains, things like the Lightning Network.
But it seems like there's parallels between that debate within Bitcoin and today. I mean, we still see lots and lots of debate between kind of the mass adoptionalists, if we can call them that, and people who want to stay more sort of pure to the vision of Bitcoin, who want to kind of keep Bitcoin or crypto smaller for censorship resistance and kind of privacy and those sort of social goals, whereas other people want to kind of make crypto more of a mass movement and get it out there, but in doing so, they kind of want to make compromises in terms of custody or in terms of privacy or in terms of some of these other self-sovereignty ideas. So don't you see parallels between then and now in the kind of wider conversation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the lasting legacy of the block size wars is that Bitcoiners in general, I think, are really, really hesitant to develop the chain. And so even non-contentious upgrades like Taproot, you ended up having conversations about how you have the conversations about development.
Right. Anna?
I feel like, the block size wars is kind of, almost forgotten part of Bitcoin history. Nobody really talks about it, even though it's like, for me, it's one of the most important parts of the Bitcoin history because it was about this social experiment. What happens to this decentralized community where, somebody wants to change the rules altogether and there are different groups who have different interests, right, and different motivations. And like when you cannot enforce change from the top down, like how it really unfolds and how it actually unfolded, I think it defied a lot of expectations that are that appeared to be not applicable to Bitcoin, to this new social structure, to this new financial system, however you approach it. And I just think that this part to understand how Bitcoin community actually work, how a decentralized crypto community actually work, it's really important to realize what's going to happen to it, right? And what you can do with these tools, and how this thing will respond when you try to affect it in different ways.
Yeah, I would also add that the thing that, when we talk about the block size wars, it makes me nostalgic in a very specific way, because I think that might have been the last time that the social stuff is important, but it was a technical debate. Like, you had to understand what was going on to be involved in that debate. And I guess now we have something vaguely similar in like layer 2s like ZK versus Optimism or something, but even that is like a tiny slice of the community. I just don't think we have conversations on technical stuff at the level that was very common 4 or 5 years ago. And I do think that's a loss, frankly, because I think that a lot of people, if you're not familiar with the block size wars, there is a great book about it. I'm forgetting the author's name for the moment.
Jonathan Beer.
Thank you. And it's a great way to learn a lot about how Bitcoin actually works, while also getting a good story about people fighting and sometimes being real SOBs to each other.
Yeah, surely that's one of the kind of legacies of the block size war, that it showed that the Bitcoin community can be extremely tribal and vicious in its kind of argumentation style, right? And there's that, I don't know, can't remember who said it, but the smaller the difference, the bigger the dispute. There's that kind of narcissism of small differences. David, another story that you're doing also involved a very contentious moment, this time in Ethereum history. It was called the DAO hack. This was, I think, a $50 million hack in 2015 or 16?
Yeah, 2016.
And that was controversial because in order to kind of safeguard the future of Ethereum, it was decided at the kind of top of Ethereum to roll back the blockchain and make the people who'd lost money whole again. And just explain why that was so contentious and why that was controversial.
Well, first, I'm just actually curious, because we talked about people forgetting the block size wars. Obviously, this is not a totally representative crowd, but just by a show of hands, how many people are familiar with the DAO 2016? So like a pretty darn small portion of people here. And just for comparison, what about the block size debate? How many people already were familiar with that? Wow, God. Okay, so we're all old people up here. Yeah, so the DAO, the thing that I learned when I was reporting the story that we didn't really have that much understanding of at the time in terms of scale, but the DAO was supposed to be a decentralized investment fund. It was launched very shortly after the launch of Ethereum. It was initially intended to raise, I think, according to Christoph, they were aiming for $2 million, and they wound up raising $50 million and then getting hacked. And that, at the time, speaking of, Jeff mentioned 70% of Bitcoin was on Mt. Gox at some point. This was 15% of all the Ethereum in existence at the time. They were not able to fix it, even though some white hats went in and engaged in some hacking wars. And so they did, as Ben put it, they rolled back the chain. Well, not technically rolled back. They did what's called an irregular state change, which is a term of art that means we moved the money. And so they took the money away from the hacker and gave it to the people who had, I don't know, it eventually found its way back. And this was obviously very contentious because at the time, especially for Bitcoiners, code is law was the rule of the day. And so this idea, it was a huge debate. Does that hacker deserve to keep the money even? But ultimately, I think the consensus at the time, at least among insiders, even people who were very engaged with this debate, was that, we just launched Ethereum. We just started this thing. It's too soon to really commit to that kind of, I don't know, biblical interpretation of the text. And so they did the state change, fixed it. And then that's actually also why we have something called Ethereum Classic, which I would also do a show of hands to see who knows what that is, but I won't embarrass anybody. But we have this forked Ethereum, all of this chaos, and a big debate that still lingers. People should go back and read about those debates that were going on at the time. Did I miss anything important about the DAO? I don't think so.
If I could just add something, the DAO also led to, I think, one of the earlier regulatory reports on crypto from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, which in 2017 published what they called the DAO report, which was basically an analysis of the DAO and its operations, and was kind of really the first step to the SEC saying, hey, this thing that you did, it kind of sure looks like you were raising money via security sale, and we would like you to not do that again. At the time, the SEC did say it wasn't going to pursue any kind of enforcement action or anything like that, but that basically was kind of the prelude to the ICO crackdown that the SEC engaged in between the end of 2017 and most of 2018. And that was kind of, it was really groundbreaking in a lot of ways there.
Yeah, breaking things. I did forget one important thing, which is, for whatever reason, I think a lot, we just had this whole wave of bank collapses, right? And people will talk about moral hazard when it comes to bank bailouts. A lot of the people were making parallel arguments at the time about the moral hazard of state changes or rollbacks in the event of hacks on a blockchain. Like, if we do it for these guys, aren't we going to have to do it for the next group of people who get hacked? And one of the most interesting things is that I think because of that self-awareness about how early it was, that has not been an issue. So some might be familiar with the parity bug, and a lot of money got lost to that. There was never any really serious discussion of doing a state change to fix that. So for whatever reason, we really got away with we're just going to do this thing once and it'll never be discussed again. But Anna, I thought you had something to say.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask the panel for their kind of favorite moment in crypto history and what and why. David, do you want to start us off?
Favorite moment? God, I'm going to get in trouble for this one. But I guess it can't really be boiled down to one moment, but
I mean, favorite moment from this package, not from all.
Okay. You saved me. I was going to say something legally actionable.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that I really do think the ICO boom is, for all of its ugliness and chaos, one of the, if not the most important moment in crypto. It opened up a door that we didn't even know was there. And if we were still basically just doing Bitcoin and you had Ethereum with no assets on it, I'm not sure what that would look like. So I think that's definitely, for me, the most important.
Nick?
Yeah, I think I'd actually echo David here because, again, we were talking about the DAO report and how that led to the ICO crackdown. From, kind of my perspective of someone who covers the regulatory policy world, the ICO boom and the ICO crackdown was kind of the first real hints of, what we got from the SEC in terms of how it's approaching, the sector. And even though, I think there's a lot of debate between the industry and regulators on, things like regulatory clarity and such, it was still the first time that we saw the, federal agency get involved in crypto and say, all right, so we believe that this is how it works and how it matches our laws and regulations and all that. And we're still seeing kind of the fallout of that today. And I imagine we're going to continue seeing it for, quite a while yet.
But it's interesting. I mean, after the ICO boom and the collapse of that, people were saying, "Oh, there's a lack of regulatory clarity. We don't know whether these securities or these tokens that we're issuing are securities or not." And people are still saying the same thing now, aren't they? Nothing's really changed.
Yeah, well, I think the question about regulatory clarity is really kind of a philosophical one in some extent, right? If you're the SEC, if you're, Chair Gary Gensler, if you're one of the enforcement directors, there's no real confusion there. You look at a crypto token and you say, oh, that looks like a security to me. And then everything else makes sense because the laws are clear on that. if you're in the crypto industry, if you're Coinbase, if you're an exchange, an issuer, your question is, well, we don't think this is a security. We think that we need a framework that addresses this not security thing that we have created. And that's what we're looking for. So if you ask a regulator, regulatory clarity is there. It's clear. It's fairly self-explanatory. The laws are clear. There's history. There's precedent. If you're a crypto company, that's where things are less clear because philosophically you just disagree about the basic thing that you're looking at and whether or not that is a security and whether or not the SEC has jurisdiction. So
but arguably the law is enforced partially, right? It's not enforced.
Right. The SEC will enforce the law either way, but the question, if you're a company, is, well, I don't think the law applies to me the way they think it. So that's where that debate is. And again, we're going to continue hearing about that. We're going to see a lot more about that. But it's a philosophical difference, and we're not seeing much movement from either side on kind of narrowing that gap.
Right. Anna?
Well, I think that that the most important moments for crypto, in my opinion, were the block size wars and the DAO hack, which happened more or less at the same period, and were like the first stress tests for this community, which showed pretty clearly how these communities will function in the future going on too. But my favorite moment in crypto was something that we did not discuss during this panel, but is somehow related to it. So before the Facebook Libra, there was another similar project. It was Telegram Stone, which never really was launched by Telegram, but there was also a lot of kind of hype around it too. And unlike Mark Zuckerberg, Pavel Durov was never summoned to Congress and never publicly testified. And at least the very last hour, a lot of people were pretty sure that Telegram will launch its coin, even being sued by the SEC, even like under the threat of all the power of the U.S. government plunging on them. And like I remember the night when there was a deadline for the launch, and some people really were expecting to get their tokens, and it was like I didn't sleep that night. And in the morning they issued the letter that you were not launching. It was like, but that was like, I think just for me that was the most like fraught moment of my coverage. That was fun.
Right. Dan, what stands out for you?
It's hard to pick just one because every day writing about crypto is a joy. But I'll give you two really quick ones. One is funny and it's recent, and it's the founder of Terra, Do Kwon, who said he was not out on the run, getting booked in Montenegro for being on the run. I think, just a classic case of hypocrisy and karma. And then another example that's not part of the package necessarily, but I think the founding of the Silk Road and the collapse of it is just something that I come back to constantly because it's something that gave us like the idea of what crypto is for, like private money, unstoppable money, and then also it led directly to the birth of Chainalysis, which kind of poked holes in those ideas. Do you want to give yours really quick, your favorite move?
I was quite fond of the Libra story because that was kind of really shook up the whole kind of debate around crypto, and I think crypto kind of went from this kind of niche thing to being this kind of very mainstream issue, and it kind of brought everyone in, and it kind of really became a kind of power battle between, regulators, governments, and like private industry.
And I should also point out that we're speaking on the metaverse stage, so that's twice now that Mark Zuckerberg has done us huge favors in crypto by just bumbling around aimlessly, and so applause for Mark Zuckerberg.
On that note, thanks very much to our panelists. That was David Morris, Nick Day, Anna Baydakova, and Dan Kuhn. I'm Ben Schiller. Thanks very much.
Thank you.